from a sultan who slipped in the bath to one strangled while his mother watched, to another dragged through the streets and tortured by his own soldiers. These are the most brutal deaths of Ottoman sultans. Sultan 15, Mehmed VI, the last sultan. Mehmed VI did not die as violently as the rest, but his end was brutal in a different way. He was the last Ottoman sultan, and he watched his empire collapse around him. After the First World War, the Ottoman state was carved up by the victors. A nationalist revolution under Mustafa Kemal abolished the sultanate entirely. In November 1922, Mehmed fled Istanbul on a British warship, smuggled out like cargo. He spent his final years in exile, moving between Malta, Mecca, and finally San Remo, Italy. When he died in 1926, he was nearly broke. 6 centuries of dynasty ended with a man who could barely afford his own funeral. Sultan 14, Mustafa I, the madman of the cafes. Mustafa spent most of his life in the cafes. The cafes, meaning the cage, was a series of sealed apartments inside Topkapi Palace where Ottoman princes were confined to prevent them from plotting rebellion. Mustafa entered as a child. He stayed for 14 years. When he finally emerged to take the throne, he was not the same man who went in. Chroniclers describe him wandering the palace, throwing coins into the sea for the fish, talking to people who were not there. He was deposed after 3 months. 4 years later, after a violent coup, he was put back on the throne. He lasted another year before being removed again. He died in 1639, still confined, his mind long since broken by the walls that were supposed to keep him safe. Sultan 13, Ahmed III, the Tulip Sultan. Ahmed III ruled during what historians call the Tulip Era. It was a period of relative peace, cultural flourishing, and extravagant spending. The Sultan built fountains, imported exotic flowers, and threw legendary garden parties. But while Ahmed celebrated, his empire was losing wars. Resentment grew. In 1730, a Janissary-backed rebellion led by an Albanian named Petrona Halil stormed the palace. The mob demanded blood. Ahmed was forced to hand over his Grand Vizier and other officials, who were promptly executed. Then, he was made to abdicate. He spent his remaining 6 years imprisoned in the palace he once adorned with tulips. He died in 1736, forgotten. Sultan 12, Mahmud II, the sultan who destroyed his own army. Mahmud II did not die by assassination. He died of tuberculosis in 1839, but his reign was defined by one of the bloodiest single days in Ottoman history. For centuries, the Janissaries had been the empire's elite infantry, but by the 19th century, they had become a corrupt political force, more interested in protecting their privileges than fighting wars. They had murdered sultans before. Mahmud decided to destroy them first. In June 1826, he provoked a Janissary revolt, then unleashed loyal artillery on their barracks. Thousands were killed in what became known as the Auspicious Incident. Mahmud spent his remaining years modernizing the empire, but his body was failing. He died at 53, having outlived his enemies, but not his illness. Sultan 11, Mehmed III, the brother killer. When Mehmed III took the throne in 1595, he followed Ottoman tradition. He had his brothers killed, all 19 of them. Some were infants. Deaf-mute executioners carried out the strangling with silk bowstrings, the method reserved for royal blood. Chroniclers say Mehmed was haunted by what he had done. He reportedly dreamed of his dead brothers and grew paranoid. He died in 1603 of unclear causes, possibly a heart attack, possibly guilt-related stress. He was 46. His reign had begun with a massacre, and it ended with a man who could not escape the faces of the children he had ordered killed. Sultan 10. Suleiman the Magnificent, the hidden corpse. Suleiman was the greatest Ottoman sultan. Under his rule, the empire reached its peak. He conquered Belgrade, Rhodes, and most of Hungary. He reformed the legal system. He built mosques that still stand. And when he died, his commanders lied about it for weeks. Suleiman died in September 1566, during the siege of Sigetvar in Hungary. He was 71 and had been ill for some time. His death was a state secret. His Grand Vizier embalmed the body, removed the internal organs, and propped Suleiman up in his carriage so troops would think he was still alive. The siege was won. Only then was the death announced. The mightiest sultan in Ottoman history spent his final journey as a puppet. Sultan 9, Bayezid I, the caged thunderbolt. They called him Yildirim, the thunderbolt, for the speed of his military campaigns. Bayezid I conquered territory from the Danube to the Euphrates. Then, he met Tamerlane. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Tamerlane's forces crushed the Ottoman army. Bayezid was captured. What happened next is disputed. Some sources say Tamerlane treated him with respect. Others say Bayezid was kept in an iron cage, paraded like an animal. The cage story may be legend, but the humiliation was real. Bayezid died in captivity within a year, possibly by his own hand. A sultan who had terrorized Europe ended his life as a prisoner, broken and powerless. Sultan 8. Selim II, the drunkard in the bath. Selim II was the son of Suleiman the Magnificent. He was not magnificent. Chroniclers called him Selim the Sot, Selim the drunkard. He preferred wine and the harem to warfare, leaving governance to his viziers. In December 1574, Selim was drunk in the palace hammam. He slipped on the wet marble floor, cracked his skull, and never recovered. He died a few days later. It was an embarrassing end for any man, let alone a sultan. His legacy is mostly a cautionary tale about what happens when you follow a giant. Sultan 7. Abdulaziz, scissors in the wrists. Abdulaziz was a modernizer. He built railways, expanded the navy, and spent lavishly on palaces, too lavishly. By 1876, the empire was bankrupt and his ministers had lost patience. A coup forced him to abdicate. 5 days later, he was found dead in Ferrier Palace, his wrists slashed with scissors. The official verdict was suicide. Almost no one believed it. The scissors were an odd choice for a man who could have used any blade. The wounds were suspiciously clean. Years later, a formal inquiry concluded he had been murdered. His killers were never punished. A sultan who tried to drag his empire into the modern age died in a locked room, and the truth died with him. Sultan 6, Mustafa IV, the loose end. Mustafa IV ruled for just over a year, and his reign was soaked in blood. He came to power after a Janissary revolt that killed his predecessor's allies, but Mustafa's position was weak. His brother Mahmud was still alive, a potential rival. When a counter-coup tried to restore the reform faction, Mustafa panicked. He ordered Mahmud killed. The executioners failed. Mahmud survived, took the throne, and had Mustafa strangled in July 1808. Mustafa was 29. He had tried to eliminate a threat and became one himself. In Ottoman politics, half measures were fatal. Sultan 5, Murad IV, the tyrant who banned wine. Murad IV was one of the most terrifying men ever to sit on the Ottoman throne. He took power at 11, but when he came of age, he ruled with extreme violence. He personally executed soldiers who displeased him. He banned alcohol, tobacco, and coffee on pain of death. He prowled Istanbul at night in disguise, killing anyone who violated his edicts. Estimates suggest he ordered tens of thousands of executions during his reign. Then, in 1640, he died. He was 27. The cause was cirrhosis of the liver. The Sultan, who had banned drinking under threat of execution, drank himself to death. Even his own body refused to follow his laws. Sultan 4, Murad I, the assassin's blade. Murad I was the first Ottoman Sultan to die in battle. At the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, Ottoman forces faced a coalition of Serbian and Bosnian nobles. The Ottomans won, but Murad did not survive to celebrate. According to the most common account, a Serbian knight named Miloš Obilić approached the Sultan's tent, pretending to defect. When he was brought before Murad, he drew a hidden blade and stabbed him. Murad died shortly after. The assassination became legend in both Ottoman and Serbian history. For the Serbs, Obilić was a martyr. For the Ottomans, he was proof that even victory could not guarantee safety. Sultan 3, Ibrahim I, killed by his mother's word. Ibrahim I was called Ibrahim the Mad. He had spent 22 years in the cafes, and like Mustafa I, he emerged damaged. He was obsessed with furs, with obese women, with spending money the empire did not have. His military adventures were disasters. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. By 1648, the Janissaries and senior officials had had enough. They demanded his removal. The decision fell to his mother, the powerful Ottoman Sultan. She had protected him for years. Now she gave the order. Deaf-mute executioners strangled Ibrahim with a bowstring. He was 32. His own mother signed his death warrant. Sultan 2, Selim III, murdered during the rescue. Selim III was a reformer who wanted to modernize the Ottoman military. The Janissaries resisted. In 1807, they revolted and forced him to abdicate in favor of his cousin Mustafa IV. Selim was imprisoned in Topkapi Palace. A year later, loyalist forces launched a counter-coup to restore him. They fought their way into the palace, but Mustafa IV, the reigning sultan, knew what a living Selim meant for his own survival. He sent executioners to kill Selim before the rescuers could reach him. Selim was strangled or stabbed, depending on the source, while his allies were still fighting just rooms away. They found his body minutes too late. A sultan who tried to save his empire was murdered because help arrived too slowly. Sultan I, Osman II, the first regicide. Osman II was young, ambitious, and deeply unlucky. He came to the throne at 14 and immediately tried to reform the Janissaries, the elite soldiers who had grown fat and rebellious. In 1622, after a failed military campaign, he announced plans to raise a new army from Anatolian peasants. The Janissaries understood the threat. They revolted. They dragged Osman from the throne, paraded him through the streets of Istanbul on a broken-down horse, and hauled him to the prison of Yedikule, the Seven Towers. What happened next was unprecedented. No sultan had ever been killed by his own soldiers. The executioners strangled him with a bowstring. Some sources claim they also crushed his testicles, a humiliation designed to unmake him as a man before ending his life. Osman was 17. His death proved that even a sultan was not safe from the men sworn to protect him. The throne was power, but power in the Ottoman world came with no guarantees. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more. And there's another one on screen right now that's even better.